Good evening, everyone. My name is Amir, and I'm the chair of the Bankside Residents Forum. I'd like to welcome you all today for coming to see the leaders of the local parties and influence, hopefully, what the vision and what Southwark will look like post-May 2018. Today we have with us Peter John, OBE, who's the leader of the local party locally and the leader of the council. We have Al-Samerai, who's the leader of the opposition, Liberal Democrats, and we have Eleanor Margolies, who's the co-leader of the local Green Party. We have other candidates who are standing, but we have a rule generally that we apply, which is if the party did not have an elected representative in the current or the previous parliamentary term, then they are not allowed to basically be on the platform. The format of the today's hustings will be similar to question time with a slight variance, which is that first off, the leaders of the local parties will be asked to give their vision of Southwark for 5 minutes, and then there will be some questions which have been submitted in advance with some supplementaries in between, and then a closing remark from each of the leaders. First of all, I'd just like to thank Coin Street, who have obviously gifted us this venue, and without them we wouldn't have space to do this. I'm sure other people will be continuing to come in, but we're going to start quite quickly and go for it. So, without further ado, I'd like to ask the leader of the council, Peter John, to give his vision for Southwark.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Amir, and thank you for organising this. I think it's very early in the electoral cycle in terms of 6 months out or so from the local elections, so I can't share with you at this stage what's going to be in our manifesto because it's still being worked on, but I can talk a bit about I think where we're coming from as a Labour Party in Southwark going into the local elections next May. Because I think what we've had in both 2010 and 2014 is a clarity of vision from Labour in Southwark about some of our very key pledges and some of our very key priorities. So whether it be free healthy school meals back in 2010 that we introduced for all primary school children, or whether it was introducing free swimming and gym use for all residents in 2014, there have been some key and I think quite iconic pledges that we have made and delivered on. And just can I say, on the free swim and gym pledge, 85,000 residents of the borough have now signed up for free swim and gym use in our leisure centres, and that's resulted in over 400,000 separate visits to our leisure centres by those residents. And I'm pleased to say a majority of those who signed up are women, and a majority of those who signed up are from a BME background. So in terms of ensuring that those maybe who wouldn't normally use a leisure centre or a gym are using it to keep fit, then the evidence is there that that's working. I mean, back in 2010, we inherited we didn't inherit a housing department, but we inherited a housing stock, which was going through a programme of so-called decent homes work, but which didn't have a timetable for delivery and had a massive financial hole. And so something that we did between 2010 and 2015 was our warm, dry and safe programme, getting the basics right in our council properties so that by April of this year, 93% of council properties in Southwark were warm, dry and safe. In 2014, we made a pledge that we were going to build 11,000 new council homes in Southwark, still the largest commitment of any council anywhere in the country. And we said our objective was to deliver 1,500 of those by 2018. Now, I have to share with you, we're not going to get to 1,500 sadly by 2018, although we'll have 1,600 in the pipeline and something like 600 built and completed. And that's because it's taken longer than we had anticipated. We want to take the community with us. It's very important, the community support, when we're building on plots on existing estates that the community supported. So the consultation process has taken longer, but I think we'll get a better and more satisfactory outcome for residents because at the end of the day, local lettings policy applies, so at least 50% of those new homes will be for residents on estates where those are built. We said we'd create 5,000 new jobs as a council and 2,000 apprenticeships, and we're going to smash that target of 5,000 new jobs. In fact, in Southwark since 2010, more than 40,000 people or additional jobs have been created, and that has to be good. And we've done this as a council at a time of unprecedented budget challenge. We've lost something like £133 million from our budget, 40% of our budget in real terms. That's a massive amount of money to have lost. We've carried on, I think, being innovative, being challenging, and delivering good services to our residents. There are challenges ahead, Amir, and those are ensuring that all of our residents are feeling that they have a genuine stake in the change that's happening in our borough. And over the last 12 months, we've been talking much more about social regeneration, about how, I suppose, the soft side of the physical changes that we're seeing in our borough affects our residents. I've talked about the jobs, but what about the health inequalities that still exist in our borough? What can we do to bridge those divides in order to improve outcomes for our residents? Housing is going to be a big topic, I have no doubt, this evening, but how do you fix housing in a broken housing economy? And our housing economy is broken. We will, as I'm sure we'll talk about this later on, but it's one of the big challenges, not just for Southwark, for London, but for our country, and I think we need to move the debate to a different place from where it is currently. There are still big physical changes to be seen. The Old Kent Road regeneration, the extension of the Cllr line, which I think will bring further jobs, homes and opportunities for our existing and future residents. So I think we live in a very exciting time, and Labour in Southwark is ready to rise to those challenges and to the challenges of our future.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Now I'll ask Eleanor if you'd like to say your vision for Southwark, please. If you just press the red button and hold it.
So you might know that the Green Party has the National Green Party has co-leaders. We do locally as well. So I'm not Phil Fabulous, who is the other co-chair who's here, but Eleanor Margolies. You might expect the Green Party to be full of vision, to be the kind of airy-fairy party, but we're not. We're full of pragmatic, practical ideas as well. And I wanted to talk a little bit about bringing together the vision and the pragmatic things, to take the opportunity to talk about something that might not otherwise be mentioned here today, which is what's happening in Bonn at the moment, the climate change conference, which is being chaired by the people of Fiji, who've asked for help in implementing what was agreed in Paris in 2015, which was an extraordinary moment when all the countries, apart from the USA, of course, but let's not worry about that for the moment, agreed that we have to take action on climate change. Now, it's affecting Fiji right now, but it's also affecting us right now, because the burning of fossil fuels leads to climate change, but it also leads to air pollution, which is a massive health crisis in London, in Southwark. So we can tackle both of them in various ways. In the Green Party, we've got to connect those global and the local issues. And I believe that local councils can make a real difference in areas that affect daily life, like housing and transport. And what I'd like to see is that a local council enables people to do the right thing, the healthy thing, the affordable thing, the right thing for the planet, because it's cheaper, it's natural, it's obvious, it's easy, it's more enjoyable. And I think this is particularly true for people on low income. So I might love the idea of renewable energy, but if I live in a council flat, it's up to the council to have a bit of vision, to show a bit of initiative, and put solar panels on the roof. Not, as in the current Ledbury estate, to install diesel burning generators, that are affecting the health of people. Another way that we cut carbon emissions is to do with changing transport. It's not about forcing people to change, it's about thinking about the whole mix. In a complex city, people walk a little bit, walk to take a bus, walk to take the tube, take children to school, go to the shops. It's a mix and match of different modes. But why do we never think the way you might on holiday? Oh, let's go for a nice walk. Let's go for a nice walk along Blackfriars Road. Well, until recently, that really didn't sound very attractive. But the changes that have come with the superhighway there, with protected space for cyclists, mean that we've seen different people cycling. It's not just men in Lycra, it's people of all ages. And it's because the space is protected, because the landscape has been transformed. That's my vision of Southwark. Even this lovely building would be affected by climate change. A small increase in sea levels would mean we were underwater. And if you look on the website for how you're going to get here, you see information about all kinds of different modes of transport, but nothing about whether there's cycle parking or about how to choose a route, a walking route that's low pollution. That's the kind of information that we need buildings to provide, but also councils. I want to bring up the standards across the borough rather than putting individuals against each other or areas against each other. My vision is for a borough that enables people to live full and healthy lives, to have access to culture, jobs and education, and that enables people to work together for a better future, for the future that they want.
Thank you, Eleanor. Now we'll move on to Anoud for your vision, please.
So I might stand if that's okay, just so I can see people at the back, because even with heels on, I'm a bit short. So, thank you very much, Amir, for organising this evening, and thank you to people for giving up your evenings to come along. Actually, local government is so important in terms of how it affects all our lives. I get incredibly frustrated with how the media only ever talks about national politics, and actually local politics is so important, other than James Hatts, our very own SE1 journalist, who's very good at following local politics, and thank you, James, for covering and being here this evening as well. As Amir says, my name's Anoud Al-Samerai. I've been a councillor for about 10 years, and I've been leader of the Liberal Democrat council group here in Southwark for 7. We have 13 councillors across the whole of the borough, from Dulwich up to this ward and across to Rotherhithe. I came to live in Southwark when I was 9 years old. My family did live in the Middle East, and we were over visiting my mum's family in Camberwell when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and suddenly we lost everything and we had to make a new home here in Southwark. And so for me, actually giving back to the borough that welcomed my family, took us in and gave us a home, has always been incredibly important, and that motivates me so much in terms of what is special about Southwark and about London, our diversity, our openness, the contribution that people make from all walks of life, whoever they are. And whatever anyone's vision for Southwark, it must be about celebrating that diversity. I'm a Liberal because I fundamentally believe that individuals and communities know the answers to the political situations that we face. So it's interesting, people often talk about left and right, and actually for Liberals we kind of don't agree with either, because we don't agree that all power should lie with the state, and we don't agree that all power should lie with the markets. It's actually individuals who should have power over their own lives. They are the ones who know best the decisions that should affect them. And so that's why when the Liberal Democrats were around the council, we introduced things like community councils, but also got really basic things right, like street cleaning, like making sure that we were building new libraries at Canada Water and investing in leisure centres, giving people the tools and the freedom to then make decisions about their own lives. For me, the future has 3 sort of very key areas that I wanted to touch on this evening. I'm sure we will talk about housing lots, but it is an area that I feel really strongly and angry that our Labour Council has failed miserably on. I think they may have had very good intentions about the relationships they've got into with developers, but at the end of the day they have sold out the communities of this borough massively. Existing residents have been forced out, priced out, and businesses have been forced out, all with this kind of good intentions of regeneration, but it's not working. I think at least now there is some recognition that it's not working, but we need to work together to find solutions. And like I say, those solutions lie with communities. It's about making sure we do regeneration with residents and not to them. And certainly anyone who's had any experience with the planning department will see a system that very much it is being done to people, the council and the developer working together, and residents on the receiving end. That's not acceptable, and that will not happen in the Liberal Democrat Southwark. The other area I think that is a growing, increasing concern for me, but also many of the residents I represent in Bermondsey and residents that contact us across the borough, is around crime. I think people are getting very anxious at the moment, whether it's acid attacks, mopeds, knife crime, terror threats, and I think we really need to work together to try and find solutions that work for different communities. I'm very worried that the Mayor is proposing closing police encounters, but I think it's more than that. I think it's about actually looking at how we target funding, particularly for youth services, particularly for young people who are most at risk of crime and antisocial behaviour. So it's not just the stick, but it's also the carrot about supporting people. London has huge resource and wealth, but sadly we have huge poverty and inequality. And unless we start to address that, you do end up with problems around crime and antisocial behaviour. And the final area that is not a really catchy political word, but it's infrastructure. It's the fact that we've had so much development in this borough, and yet with those developments the council has not secured what it needs, whether it's GP places, school places, improvements to transport, and those are the things. We can't just keep densifying the borough. We can't just have taller and taller blocks without giving people the services that they need. Residents are reasonable people. They understand we live in London, that there will be development. But what they want to see is benefits for them. And again, it's about doing stuff with residents, with communities. What are the needs in this area that are different from the needs in Camberwell and Peckham, and really working with residents. So thank you very much again for the opportunity for the debate. Really looking forward to it. And I hope that we can come to a position after May 2018 where this council works with residents rather than just doing stuff to them.
Thank you, Amir. I'm going to move on to the first question, but one thing I want to say, so after the question, the leaders will be able to respond with their answers, and then there'll be supplementals. When the supplementals are made, I would ask if please they're not made as statements and they are questions, please. So I'll move on to the first question, which is from Ida.
Hello, you've mentioned housing, several of you, and my question's about housing. We all know there's a housing crisis and that the current climate makes it difficult to build genuinely affordable housing or social housing in our area. In light of these difficulties, what ideas do the candidates have to maintain a diverse community and to allow for key workers to be able to afford to live amongst us?
Thank you. I'll go alphabetically, so Peter.
Okay. Well, you're right, we have a broken housing economy, and I alluded to that in my opening remarks. And you only need to understand a couple of figures. If you go back to 1969-70, as a country, we built about 380,000 new homes, of which 185,000 were council homes. Last year, as a nation, we built something like 165,000 homes, of which, we'll take the pick, there's a few figures you can look at, but it's about 2,000 were council homes. So what we've done over the last 45 years or so is remove a massive section of housing delivery, i.e. council housing, and never replaced it. And all of the problems that we're talking about and the housing crisis that we have now is down to that. And what happened was, bless her, Mrs. Thatcher, with her right to buy in the mid-1980s, effectively turned off council house building. Right through to 1983, I think you were still having tens of thousands of council homes being built. She turned it off. and we've never replaced it. And so we end up now with a situation where we, as a nation, have subcontracted the responsibility for building pretty much all housing to the private sector. And that's not sustainable, because the private sector is never going to build at a scale which dents its profits. It will always build around about the same number of homes year in, year out. Whatever we do fiddling around the edges of things. And so what we need to do, and I doubt we'll get it from the Chancellor in his budget, but what we need to do is to have the shackles removed from us as local authorities to borrow more in order to build more, and also for the government to put money directly in to councils' pockets in order to build. That's what needs to happen. What can we do in the meantime? Well, we have to do as much as we can, build as much as we can, in order to provide as much different housing as possible. Over the last 5 years, Southwark, we've had something like 7,500 new homes built in Southwark, of which in excess of 1,500 are genuinely affordable social rent homes. We've got one of the best records in terms of delivering homes and affordable homes of anywhere in London. The problem is, the rest of London is not building at scale. If every London borough was building 1,500 homes a year, there are 32 London boroughs, we would not have half the housing crisis that we have now. So the answer to a housing supply crisis is not to stop building, is not to make it so difficult that builders won't build. It's to do everything we can to encourage them to build, and that sometimes requires a pragmatic approach to things. What can we do in order to meet those who don't qualify for social housing and can't afford to buy? Well, we have to look again, don't we, at what other affordable rent or assistance products we can find, and there are. The government's affordable rent category is pretty discredited as a notion, but I think we can do more in our borough. We're doing quite a lot, but there's even more we can do to ensure that there is housing for people from every income bracket. That's what we have to do. But my bottom line message: A, we need to fix the broken housing economy. Secondly, we need to carry on building in Southwark as we have been.
Thank you, Peter. Eleanor?
In many ways, that sounds quite plausible. I mean, I can't disagree with the analysis of what Thatcher did with Right to Buy and the fact that there was a stop put to council houses being built. But what we've seen in Southwark has been a handing over of public goods, of land that belonged to the commons, that belonged to Southwark, and it's been given to developers to build out. And there are many different reasons why that might not have worked out as we hoped, but one of them might be that the developers assume that they have to have a 25% rate of profit, and they put that in their figures as their baseline. I'd also like to ask how many of the properties that Peter John refers to as having been built in Southwark are now actually occupied. We don't necessarily have a housing supply crisis. We have not enough homes for people to live in, but we have a lot of safe deposit buildings, tall towers that are not occupied, that are owned by investors who have no intention of living in them. They don't need to make money by renting them. They'll just sell them on because their value will increase. We know that because we go past those buildings and we see that they're dark. Now, we do need to build more houses. We do need to build more council houses, and I totally agree that what we want is to have a government that will fund councils to build council houses. Absolutely. But in the meantime, there are lots of other ways to think about getting more homes into a local area. We can look to Lewisham, where RUSS, the Rural Urban are building on a bit of land that no developer wanted because it's difficult, but they're putting their sweat equity, they're putting their own work in. They've raised funds to self-build. We can look at St Clement's, where there's a community land trust in East London, where the land remains within the community and the price of the flats is pegged to local incomes in perpetuity. So there are other ways to do it. It's not as simple as just handing things over to the developer to build out. It's more complicated, it's more bits and pieces, but there are lots of really interesting solutions around at the moment.
Thank you, Eleanor. Anud?
Is that working? Sorry, struggling with technology. You're right to say that all governments over many years, over decades, have failed to tackle the housing crisis. But that doesn't mean that we should let local government get away with nothing. I said I believe in local government, and this Labour Council for the last 7 years has pursued policies which are flawed and which have made the housing crisis in this borough worse. They've done that in 3 particular ways that I can think of. Firstly, about what they've done with council land. Secondly, about their selling off and demolishing versus their building figures. And thirdly, about their relationship with developers. So let's remember what happened at the Haygate, at the Elephant, at the heart of this borough. Over 1,200 council flats have been replaced with 79 at council rents. Over 1,000 lost, less than 100 back. That was a deal signed by the Labour Council with land lease developers who are making enormous, astronomical profits at our expense using our land that belongs to us. So that's what they're doing with council land. Peter talked about council homes they're building. He doesn't tell you that they have built about 200 since 2010. Great, we want 200 new council homes. It depends whether you count temporary accommodation, whether you count the ones that you bought off housing associations, so they would have been social housing anyway. But say, okay, you can have 360, Peter, if you really want it. You've sold off or demolished over 2,000. So actually, the net loss is 1,600. So let's not pretend that the people of this borough are better off in terms of the overall number of council homes since you took control in 2010. And then finally, the relationship with developers. This is the stuff that makes me really, really sick. The council's planning policy is that 35% of new homes in new developments should be affordable. Development after development, they get away with nothing on site. Not 20%, not 10%, 0%. I asked the ward councillors, David Noakes and Adele Morris and Maria Linforth-Paul, who represent this ward, before I came this evening about a few developments. In this ward alone, over the last 7 years, Ludgate and Sampson, 500 new homes, not a single one affordable. Neo Bankside, 217 homes, not a single one affordable. One Blackfriars, 274 homes, not a single one affordable. One The Elephant, a 36-storey tower in the heart of the borough, not a single affordable home. Skipton House, South Bank Tower, the list goes on, and these are buildings that we see going up around us, and none of them are affordable for local people. And the mayors did a report this year which said that in Southwark, 1 in 4 new build properties are sold abroad. They're not being sold as homes, they're being sold as investments for people with lots of money, not for the local people who need them. So I am horrified when Peter says he wants to carry on building in the same way. If we do, then none of us will be left in this borough. It will be literally empty flats sitting there as investments, not homes. You asked about alternative solutions. I think firstly, I would be so much tougher on developers. Our planning committee has turned down 2 planning applications in 7 years. Well, any developer knows that Southwark's a soft touch. You talk to developers behind closed doors, they say, we know we'll get it through. If it gets to planning committee, we know it's going through. So any negotiation, I mean, I'm not a professional lawyer, but anything would tell you some common sense. You've got to be tougher if you want them to bring forward better deals. We need mixed communities.
If I could ask you to wrap up, please.
We need mixed communities, and therefore actually a planning policy that has a third affordable, a third intermediate for actual people who won't qualify for council, and then a third private. So genuine mixed, and then being creative. Eleanor mentioned community land trusts. The other thing is about community self-build. Actually, to tackle these problems, we need to stop the horrific things Labour have been doing, and we need some really creative new ideas for the borough.
Thank you, Anud. Okay, so we're going to take a couple of supplementals, and then so I'll take about 3, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So I'll start with Danielle first.
She doesn't want to read it. Given the problems and the uncertainty over the Ledbury Estate tower blocks in Peckham, will you all make a commitment to keep the estate as 100% council home and make this pledge publicly tonight but also in the manifesto?
So we'll start off with Nude.
I promise I'll try and be brief in there. The answer, Danielle, is yes. I also want to just thank you and the campaign group for how much work you've done to bring these issues to the council's attention. I think the Ledbury is a really good example of where the council was failing to listen to residents, where concerns were being raised over months and years, and actually the council thought it knew best. And the answer to me is always that residents know best about their homes and what's going on. That site should absolutely stay 100% council housing, but we also need to make sure that it's good quality council housing and that the people who are living there are properly looked after. I mean, you know better than me the sort of catalogue of problems there have been with people without heating and hot water, people not being given appropriate temporary accommodation. Fire safety is obviously a really big worry for residents at the moment across the borough, and I think the council must listen more to concerns rather than dismissing them.
Thank you. Eleanor?
I can only second Anoop's points there. Are people aware of the full story of the Ledbury here? There's some nodding where people were not. So a block of flats where over years people were saying, we've got these weird holes, we've got cracks running through the building, you can smell when somebody else is making toast downstairs. Is that right? Is that how it should be? Reporting these repairs and being dismissed, being put off by housing officers. And then, after Grenfell, people were talking about compartmentalisation, and another look was taken at that building, and it was found that the promises that were made when it was handed over from the GLC were not in fact true. It was not in fact safe. The gas had to be turned off because it was exposed, it had a structural fault that it was believed had been fixed. So exactly as Anoop says, it was a case of residents not being listened to, and quite simply, yes, the Green Party of course would support it remaining council housing.
Thank you. And Peter?
Danielle's been at a meeting where I've given this commitment already. I think just to put into context, and Danielle knows I'll say this, but I mean, I think it's right, over the last 10 years, less than 1% of repairs issues that were brought to the attention of the council concerned gaps. Now, I'm not saying that that's a reason why they should be ignored or not dealt with, but in every case where that was raised, it was dealt with. But clearly, there have been issues in terms of the council proceeding under mistaken belief as to the structural integrity of those blocks. As you say, Eleanor, GLC blocks that were handed over to the council in the mid-1980s. I do want to say I do believe the council has responded swiftly and properly to the concerns that Danielle and other residents have raised since the summer, and I think as a council, I think we turned the gas off. When was it? 9th of August, something of that nature, and then by the middle of October, every flat was linked up to a district heating system. So everybody had heating, hot water, as well as sufficient electrical power to run whatever was needed electrically within the blocks. And that was from a standing start. There was no district heating system there. Everybody had individual heating within their flats, and there was a very inadequate electrical supply. So a lot's been done within a couple of months. As I said, I'm not defending anything that's happened in the past in terms of if things have been ignored. We'll wait for Arup to report next week on what further works might be needed for these blocks. But absolutely, since August, the residents have absolutely been front and centre of our concerns, and I think the lesson for us now, and the challenge for us now, is how do we make sure that the kind of service that residents have received at Ledbury is rolled out right across our borough, because I think we've got to a much better place in terms of individual support for residents and responding to the problems there.
Thank you. We'll go for Shima and then yourself.
Okay, I'm Shima, the founder of Women's Action Against Violent Extremism, and the way we do that is tackle and prevent violent extremism through human rights approach by working with women particularly, but also bringing to the front line young people and working with local community. And as Anur mentioned earlier, particularly young people, I question women in here, women as victims, as participants, and also as having an important role to play in building peace in our societies. I wear my other hat now, and I will ask another question very quickly. I'm the chair of Cllr House Residents Association, the last thing we heard that they are moving towards a formal proposal to redevelop our building, and it has been a really concern for our residents, particularly regarding gentrification. What is the plan to protect people in their community and ensure that communities are not broken down and people are actually staying in their community? Thank you.
Thank you, Shima. We'll start with Peter.
Okay, well, I don't know of any proposals. I don't know what that's referencing. I think there are challenges. What happens in Southwark is not confined to Southwark. It is a London-wide phenomenon in terms of the investment and the growth of our city. Our city is the largest it's ever been in terms of population. That puts an incredible strain on our resources. I do take issue with some of the points that Anoop made earlier on. Where we have no on-site affordable housing, it's because we believe that we can deliver much more genuinely affordable council housing off-site, and so the money that we've taken from some of the developments that Anoop referenced are building those 11,000 new council homes which are let at council rents. And I don't think you can just dismiss the fact that the council buys and acquires new properties which are let at council rents. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't complain about the lack of genuinely affordable housing and then say that the council cannot count within its 360 or 1,500 or 11,000 those homes that we have bought in order to let at genuinely affordable council rents, because they wouldn't have been let at council rents but for us acquiring them. They would not have. They would have been let at a whole variety of affordable rents which we would deem unaffordable. So I don't know what your specific, as I say, I can't respond to specific because I don't know and I don't believe that there are proposals to do anything elsewhere. In terms of keeping a mixed community, we still, even in this part of the world, 40% of our housing is council housing. I think the biggest challenge is for those people that you were talking about in the middle, who don't qualify for council housing and can't afford to buy. How do we find housing for them? And also, the other trick is how do we as a council influence policy so that we don't lose the services and shops that people on low incomes need in their community as well? Because it's all very well, losing, the £5 hair salon to be replaced by a £50 hair salon. We can't control all of that as a council unless we own the property, for instance. But we don't own all property in Southwark. There are other landlords out there and other business interests which determine what happens in the market, and that's the big challenge for us as a community. Not only to keep the housing, but to keep the services that go with it.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to move on to one other person, Eleanor, and then if you want to add to that, then Eleanor.
If I can, I'll just tell a story about a different way of regeneration. I live on a council estate, which Peter knows very well because he's my councillor in South Camberwell. The council wrote to the residents there a few years ago and said that they were going to demolish some blocks. And the residents said, but we really like these blocks. They are well built and we've got a good community and we don't want to leave. And they organised their own ballot with the Electoral Reform Society for an alternative vision. And regeneration has become a bit of a dirty word in lots of areas of Southwark, but the regeneration on my estate has been about turning unused spaces, the drawing rooms at the top, into homes, and it's about building new blocks in the infill. Now, I won't pretend that the year in which every single day from 8 till 5 There were angle grinders and cement mixers. A stone's throw from my flat was the best year of my life. It was pretty hard. But I and my neighbours are still living in the same place, going to the same schools with our neighbours, the shops, the neighbourhood that we've got. That regeneration was a regeneration that allowed people to stay and have the fabric of the estate improved. There are other ways to do it. So stick together with your housing association and argue and tell people about alternatives.
Thank you. And you?
Thanks very much for the question and for the work that your charity is doing. Just on the involvement of women in conflict resolution, I think is something that's very sort of under the radar. There's lots of evidence that Northern Ireland, the peace process was very much kind of what made it really happen at the end of the day was the sisters and mothers and daughters coming together and saying this can't go on. And I think certainly some of the work that is done with gang crime in Southwark taps into that very well. There's also some really good mediators and young mediators that work very well with young people. So thank you for what you do. I mean, I think, you know, I've talked a lot and made it very clear my opinions about how regeneration is a dirty word because it is pushing residents out the borough. That's not to say, you know, you can be against all progress and there are benefits, but the council has a role in protecting existing residents and existing businesses. And actually, I think one of the problems with the way the council, and it's not just Southwark, I mean, it's other inner London Labour councils as well, have effectively seen their relationship with developers rather than there being there on behalf of residents. It's about facilitating development, and actually that's not the council's role. The council is not there to maximise money. The council is not there to say, okay, this is the best we can get for this bit of land, because actually its value isn't always about a monetary value, and I think we have lost sight of it in public debate, and you know, we've had so much talk about kind of the worth of everything that we forget that actually, you know, the worth of the hair salon that Peter just referred to, it's not just about people getting a cheap haircut, it's where people come together and talk and share, and it's about community. It's why, you know, community pubs are really important, and why we work so hard. I mean, in my ward we've got a pub, it's not owned by the council, but we're fighting really hard to say that, to stop it being turned into luxury flats, because actually it's got a value that is beyond just the value of that land. And I think sadly, just one little example, there are 5 flats on top of the council's building in Tooley Street, the town hall. There are 5 flats that the council rents out. The council doesn't rent them out at council rents because it can get loads more than market rents in London Bridge. So it only sees the kind of pound sign value of those flats rather than actually what would benefit local people. I just think it's kind of all twisted that everything's looked at the money value rather than the community value, which actually is what you've touched on being so important.
Thank you very much. And we'll have one more supplemental and then we'll move on to the next question. Sorry, we don't have that much time. So your supplemental question, if you could just say your name as well, please.
Al Wilson. I don't represent any particular body, but I would like to say that I am concerned about the lack of provision of amenity. I feel that perhaps the focus of the council is on fulfilling targets in relation to providing housing. Now, I'm not going to go into whether the policy which it's been pursuing and its relationship with developers is a good one or a bad one, but I do feel, for example, that my particular bugbear is the lack of decent secondary schools in the area. I know many, many families that have had to move out of this area because they have a child, usually a son, unfortunately, because there are hardly any schools for boys in the area and none of them are really very good. They've actually had to move out of London or move to completely different areas of London, and because of that they've also had to uproot younger children from the primary schools that they've settled in at. They may even have had to take away a business that they were running.
Could I ask you to turn into a question, please? Sorry.
Well, my question therefore is, what do the councillors sitting here consider to be the right sort of policy to pursue? For example, my local, there's a piece of land near where I live in Borough, which is at the old fire station, and I would love to see that turned into a secondary school, and I would like to see that prioritised. I would like to feel that money isn't going to come first, and the local authority is going to see that as a priority for delivering to the local community.
Thank you. Anish?
very much why I sort of in my introductory statement talked about infrastructure. I think school places have been a ticking time bomb in terms of we know that there's more development happening, more residents, children getting older, and we need those school places. And GP appointments is the other thing that comes up a lot to me on the doorstep, is around having to wait weeks and weeks for a GP appointment. Good news on school places in this ward is the old fire station has been designated for a secondary school, and it's going to be Haberdasher Asks, who are a really good school in Lewisham, and it will be one of their schools, and certainly the ward councillors have supported that campaign. There are some actually legitimate concerns that residents have about how the traffic works and that kind of thing, and whenever you've got a new development, you need to make sure it fits in with the community. But absolutely agree with you, and particularly the challenge around boys' secondary school places. I mean, for me, I think you have to get this stuff from the developers before they're allowed to get their planning permission. And that's where the weakness seems to be, with the kind of development that happens first, and then the infrastructure is always being a catch-up. And actually, we need to get it the right way around. They do have to make contributions to the community, and we need the council to be much more strategic, saying this is the need in this particular community. Give us the money before you get your luxury flats.
Thank you. Peter?
Okay, I mean, I do remember a time when the Lib Dems were running the council when there was a genuine school places shortage, and I'm pleased to say since 2010 that has not been the case. And we have responded to the massive growth in school place numbers across our borough by providing and investing in both primary and secondary school places. The old fire station, yes, has been championed by this Labour council as a suitable place for a secondary school, and we have worked with haberdashers to get it delivered there. Now, what is the fly in the ointment in the current planning application there? Hadston, who bought the site, bought it from Mayor Boris Johnson, from the fire brigade. They paid too much for that site, in our view, and so they are coming to us now because it's not just a school, it's a school with housing as part of that development there, and they're saying to us that that site will deliver zero affordable housing. Our advisors, the council's advisors, this terribly weak council that doesn't talk to developers and rolls over, has said, our advisors have said it should deliver policy compliant affordable housing, and the only reason it isn't is because you paid too much money to the mayor back in 2014-15. So we now have gone to the current mayor and said, hold on, this is the current process. This is our dilemma as a council. We want to see the school, we need to see the school, and we need to see the school open very shortly. So they need to start on site, we need to get this planning application through swiftly. But at the moment it's going to deliver no affordable housing. What are you, Mr Mayor, and the fire brigade going to do in order to ensure we also get affordable housing on this site? And that's an ongoing conversation. So, we are a council which not only is thinking about education and good quality education and championing it and delivering it, we're also seeing how we can deliver affordable housing, because if we don't have those conversations now, I know that in further hustings meetings, people are going to be saying, but why didn't you get affordable housing at the fire station? It's not our fault, it's the mayor, and it was Mayor Boris Johnson. But that's the dilemma. But the alternative is, the mayor goes out, re-procures, we don't get a school for another 3 or 4 years. So that's the challenge. So sometimes you have to make choices. You can't have everything, but I know that there should be affordable housing delivered on this site, and we see what the mayor says about it. But it's not a problem for our creation anew, it's a problem of the system, and it's a problem of the previous mayor.
Sorry, we're going to have to move on, sorry. Eleanor, please.
I mean, this is a case where it's a real historical problem in South East London, isn't it? The distribution of secondary schools. It goes back to the way that the schools were set up by charities and churches, and they're very peculiar across Lewisham, Southwark and Lambeth. So it seems really weird to me that this does come down to a council level, and that we're also dealing with this mishmash which the government has given us of free schools, academies, all competing with each other. This is something that needs to be back at the national policy level, to have planning across London. I mean, it is ridiculous that we're setting one borough against another. People need to have schools that are in walking distance, because that is good for children's education. We have absolute rock solid evidence that children who walk to school do better educationally because they're stimulated by their environment, they get a bit of exercise, they meet people, they're embedded in their community. They can walk home with their friends after school instead of being stuck on public transport. It takes pressure off public transport as well. It's a total win-win. That's why we need to have a reform of education organisation and not be putting it down to the level of this kind of crazy patchwork of free schools, haberdashers sponsoring all kinds of different sub-schools around different boroughs. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Those of you that haven't been able to ask a question, at the end we may have some time, so I will maybe allow you to ask your questions at this time. We're going to move on to the next question that has been submitted in advance, and the question is about faith communities and community cohesion in general. From Marion, please.
Southwark aspires to be the borough of culture. And what plans do the leaders have to work with the many and varied faith communities throughout the borough to build good community cohesion, which will ensure that the borough of culture sits on a healthy, thriving bed of communities with good mental health and the diversity is well represented.
Thank you. And we'll start with Eleanor, please.
Thanks. It's really terrific to link the question of faith communities together with the borough of culture, because this is quite an exciting initiative from the mayor to have a borough of culture, but we have got so much culture already going on in Southwark. And my response would be to champion and celebrate what cultural organisations are already doing. I've just come from the Suppliant Women at the Young Vic down the road, which has got an extraordinary community choir that reflects the diversity of Southwark, that puts on stage people that you will not see in the West End, that they have recruited from all kinds of local organisations, specifically people who have not been on the stage before. And it's a top-class performance. So there are people we already know in Southwark working across cultural organisations in theatres, galleries, museums, who are doing amazing work. And my first step would be to learn from them and then empower them to do more.
Thank you, Eleanor. And we'll move to Anud.
Thank you very much, Marion. I mean, as Eleanor says, really, I think we're so lucky about what the contribution made to this borough by people of all faiths and people of none, in terms of the cultural contribution, but also the stuff that's hidden away that, you know, churches looking after elderly residents. I was at the Southwark Eid in Burgess Park, and the amount of youth work that the Muslim community does. So just really how important it is to recognise that, because I think people are often working away, making a difference, and it's not often recognised. And I think certainly that's where the council can take a leadership role in saying we recognise that and we thank you, because actually the work those organisations do save the council a huge amount of resource in terms of preventing some of the challenges that end up costing more further down the line. I think one of the challenges we have is the kind of diversity of culture in the borough means that we have organisations like the Tate Modern, which are actually very wealthy and bring a huge number of visitors, and how we try and get the benefits of that spread out throughout the borough. I mean, we were a bit critical because the Local Council kind of gave £1 million to the Tate Modern without any consultation at all. It's not because I think the Tate Modern is a bad organisation, but I do think if there's that sort of money sloshing around, then actually let's have a real debate with communities about how they want to spend that money on culture in this borough, because there are lots of things that don't get as much publicity as somewhere like the Tate Modern, but the arts groups, I mean, I go to some great amateur dramatic productions, the things that are happening, as Ellen talked about, choirs, there are lots of stuff out there where a few pennies would go an awful long way, and so I'd just like us to have a bit more of a debate about culture in the borough, recognising what, you know, groups with a faith connection and no faith connection do, but also if there is some funding, let's have a real genuine consultation about how we spend that and support the amazing community and voluntary sector that we have here.
Thank you very much, Amir. And do we have any supplementals on that question? Sure.
I'm particularly concerned with some of the churches that are perhaps relatively newer in the borough, some of the black African churches, for instance, and the huge now Latin American community, who are sort of organised socially, but also in churches, church groups. There seems to be a question of how best to engage with those groups and how to encourage them. And I was hoping perhaps for some suggestions on what could be done from the council end.
Peter?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think thank you, Maren, for your question. It's great that you have linked up to the Borough of Culture, and we are pioneers. Is our Southwark Pioneers is our hashtag. So please, if you haven't signed up and registered your support for the Borough of Culture bid, please do so. Go to our Twitter feed, the Southwark Council Twitter feed. You're right. I was at an event last night. I was at a Southwark Hindu Association event last night, where a guy who is a Latin American journalist came up and spoke a typical Southwark event where you're reaching so many different communities. And I think it's a question of us as elected representatives going out and about and talking to our communities. Our mayors go out and do that, don't they, year after year, talking to so many amazing communities, different communities. We still have our multi-faith forum in Southwark. I don't know how effective you think that is at the moment, but I mean, it is. The idea is to bring together so many of our churches. Do we work sufficiently with some of the large Black African churches? There's always more that we can do. We did a couple of years ago publish some advice for those churches and worked closely with them, particularly on planning issues. I think most of those churches have been spoken to that operate in the Old Kent Road recently, because we've been trying to help them there as well. And obviously we do value enormously our Latin American community at the Elephant and want to ensure that that remains there. We were the first council to recognise the Latin American community in terms of ethnic monitoring, and we will continue to promote good relations there. So I think it's beholden on all of us to carry on doing the work that we're doing. I'll pick your brain later in terms of the multi-faith forum and whether we're reaching some of those groups there, or whether it's just too much of, well, I won't say too much of the established churches, but the established churches who are dominating that. But there are conversations going on, I think, across the borough. We need to make sure that we're linked into as many of them as possible. And it's part of what we're doing with the Southwark Conversation, actually, at this time, trying to make sure that we're talking to communities that we don't necessarily talk to in some of our consultation events up to now. So, lots more to do, but there is quite a lot going on already, I think.
Thank you, Peter. Eleanor?
Thanks. It's nice to hear about the Latin Elephant and about the Black African churches on the Old Kent Road, because I was exactly going to mention them in the context of development and Southwark's plans for those areas. Culture is very much linked to economic and social vibrancy as well. So if you look at the Old Kent Road, we've got lots of small businesses, often run by black or ethnic minority proprietors. We've got lots of light industry, all kinds of very interesting crafts that supply London specialist businesses like set making and construction. The culture depends on people being able to live and work within the city. If those people have to move out because the Old Kent Road becomes a kind of dormitory town of new flats with no industry, then, well, so much for the churches and the culture that springs from them. If the Elephant and Castle shopping centre is replaced by a bland shopping centre with the same multiple stores that we see everywhere, we're going to lose those small traders who often start off with a market stall, a small area of a shop, And from there, a whole community finds a meeting place, a place to develop a business, a place to make culture, a place to meet each other. There are some very good little films at the moment about the Elephant Castle shopping centre which demonstrate exactly this link between thriving small businesses that might just have 1 or 2 employees, but they're living. The small businesses that then attract people who come for a coffee, to find people, to get to know people and feel at home in London, and the culture. I've got a very strong image now of the film that I saw last night about the Elephant Castle shopping centre with some flamenco dancing happening inside the shopping centre. It's described as not just an economic place, a shopping centre, but also a cultural centre.
Thank you, Eleanor. And Amir?
Yeah, just very briefly, because I certainly share the concerns about the Old Kent Road and the Elephant and what happens if you change businesses, and particularly those small ethnic minority businesses. I was very upset at a meeting with a council officer who said, you know, we don't want that sort of mechanics in our new Elephant Town Centre, and you know, there are mechanics that's been there for a long while and employed generally ethnic minority communities, and I just think there's a real danger that people have an idea of what a central London modern borough looks like, and you know, actually I love the little old businesses on the Old Kent Road where, you know, you've got the Algerian bakery that you pop into, and I just think we lose something really special if we want everything to look modern and chain shops and that kind of thing, and that's what happens if you push the prices up because they're the only businesses that can afford to be there. I just also wondered whether it was worth kind of mentioning on culture and well-being about heritage and conservation, because I think that's something that often with some of the discussion about regeneration and new development, we lose sight of what we are losing in terms of the heritage of this borough, and we see kind of, you know, conservation areas like Valentine Place which are losing the heart of them. It's being torn down despite huge opposition from residents saying there are ways of retaining some of our kind of Victorian heritage, our industrial heritage. So I just think it's something else that we need to be conscious of, as well as the kind of local businesses, the culture, the social fabric, also the actual buildings of this borough that have history kind of living and breathing in them. We need to really take them seriously. And councillors have a responsibility not just to the residents who elect them today, but to future generations. And that for me is something that the council is currently losing sight of, that we have a duty that places us in centuries of local government, and that we need to be thinking about the past and the future as well.
Thank you, Anu. So does anyone have any further supplementals on community cohesion? Okay, got 2. So take yourself first, and then yourself.
Hello, my name's Margolies Hemming. How do we secure the funding to achieve the communities that we all so clearly want?
Sorry, could you just repeat that?
How can we secure the funding to achieve to establish the communities that we also clearly want?
Okay, thanks. And we'll take the gentleman's question as well at the same time.
My question's in 2 parts. The first is, do the panel agree that where groups of residents feel that they are a community in their own right and they wish to have their own representation, that the council's community engagement department should actually facilitate new tenants and residents associations for premises rather than seek to ignore residents, as happened on our estate with the Cherry Garden redevelopment, a mostly BME group of residents, which is in a new ward. And secondly, would the panel agree that the Thames super sewer monstrous construction that goes on till 2 o'clock in the morning is the thing that destroys communities, that the government gave too much power through the Act of Parliament, the DCO, that set it up, and that Southwark should recommit itself to doing absolutely everything it can to defend the residents who are being tortured on a daily basis by that work.
Okay, thanks. So we'll go for in order the questions were asked, and we'll start with yourself, Peter.
Okay, well, Marie-Claude, that really interesting question, because how do we do that at a time when government isn't wanting to fill that void, as it were? And it's the challenge that we face as a council. How do we try and balance all of these things? You know, regeneration over the last 7 years has brought £390 million of benefits into the borough. That's not a small amount of money. It has paid for the new leisure centre, the Castle Leisure Centre. It's paid for us to carry on providing some services that we would otherwise not have been able to. So, you know, saying we don't want this, or, you know, this doesn't, you know, tick our particular boxes, isn't, you know, free. There are consequences if we took a different course or path. You know, ultimately, I think there are things that we can still do in the world here and now, and not in a world as might be, but in the world here and now, how we can make the Southwark pound, as it were, go further than it does. We've talked a bit about kind of the health service infrastructure. How much more can we work with our health partners? We're working pretty closely with them these days, but what more can we do to ensure that health outcomes are better, that there is that better link up between health and social care? But as I say, all of these are challenging. You know, we're talking about the Old Kent Road regenerate. It's all a bit in the abstract, unless the Treasury comes up with money for the Bakerloo Line extension. You know, there was one person, I think, protesting against the Bakerloo Line extension the other Saturday, but that's a real, you know, it is a genuine minority. I think most people want to see, you know, people being able to get in and out of Central London, in and out of work quicker than they currently can, because the people who will be using that tube, I'm sure, will be those from lower income backgrounds. Gary, your question. Yes, I mean, that obviously the council should be facilitating, you know, tenants and new tenants and residents association where that is appropriate and where it has local support. I know something about what you're referencing, but I don't know enough to give a kind of a proper answer, and you might know more than I can. But you know, there are always issues about borders and things like that. In terms of borders, are responsible for so much, aren't they? But in terms of where a border lies around a tenants and residents association, that I think we're behind the issue you're raising. And on the Thames Super Sewer, I mean, I was appalled, as everyone was, I think, you know, to see that the works were going on into the early hours of the morning the other day. That's absolutely reprehensible. I know, I think today we've got a reply from the Chief Executive of Thames Tideway on some of the issues that have been raised recently through concerning mental health and well-being. I haven't read the email yet, it only came through this evening, but I know that came through. And you know, I'm sure that you would think we're inadequate in some respects in terms of our response thus far. I mean, I could predict that, but I think we have demonstrated as a council that we're not prepared for the Thames Tideway to you know, ignore residents. We've tried to get the very best deal that we can, given, as you say, and suggested, that Thames Tideway have a huge power in this process, and the council, you know, is kind of rendered sometimes, almost feels like an observer. Well, we're not going to get into this process, as you know. We've called people into meetings. We've called the Chief Executive of Thames Tideway into meetings where that's been appropriate, and raised our concerns in order to ensure that local residents are protected. It's incredibly frustrating. We knew this was the wrong site. We campaigned against it. We said it was the wrong site. I went to get evidence at the public inquiry that this was the wrong site. Sorry, I'm going on a bit, but Gary, you have my commitment again tonight that we'll do everything we can to support you.
Thank you, Peter. Anud?
Thanks, Amir. Just want to just pick up on one point Peter made, which suggests it's kind of all or nothing with developers. Like, you have to give them everything you want, or they won't do anything. Actually, they have to make contributions legally. So some of the money you're talking about, they absolutely have to make. But it is actually about being tough. Like I said at the beginning, a negotiation is where they think you're going to say no at some point. And the problem is, the developers in this borough know that the council never says no. I see it often as the same thing that happened with the Labour Party when they were in government, and the kind of way they got very flattered by the banks and kind of did everything the financial services wanted, And it was basically because, you know, the economy would do well, and if we let them do what they want, then we'll all get some money and it will trickle down and it will be great. And that's sort of the attitude with developers in Southwark, that, you know, if we let them do what they want, we will get money and we'll spend it on council housing elsewhere, even though your own figures show you can't get the council housing elsewhere, and even though it's completely unjust because it creates more inequality, not less. So I think there is this danger that basically there's been not enough regulation in exactly the way that happened with kind of the financial services that's happened with developers here in Southwark. The answer about kind of how we therefore achieve funding for the communities that we want to protect, I think first of all it's not necessarily just a funding issue. I think it is about being really tough and having red lines with those developers. So on the Old Kent Road, actually saying you need to protect some of the industrial heritage, that we need employment space, that it can't all just be about luxury flats, that we need jobs for people to do, and jobs that aren't just people commuting into the city, but actually jobs that locals can do, skilled labour, that kind of work, which is so much a part of the heritage of the Old Kent Road. On funding, there have been cuts to local government, and I think that certainly austerity has had its day. I think local government has taken tougher cuts than many other government departments, but there are still choices to be made, and I think it's really important that we don't let the council get away with kind of saying all the good stuff they've done, and the money was no problem for that, and then all the bad stuff is the fault of cuts. Well, actually, there are choices. So I mentioned £1 million to the Tate Modern. Labour councillors have increased their own allowances over this last 7 years. They've introduced new cabinet members, they've introduced payoffs for councillors that are standing down, who've been in the cabinet. So there is money there. They spent 15 grand on a full stop on a logo. So, you know, there are choices, there is waste, and certainly funding, it's always a challenge, but actually it's about priorities. And for me, the bigger priorities are things they have cut, like youth services. They tried to cut 73% of the youth services budget. We made a big fuss, they cut 44% of the youth services budget, so less, but still a massive cut to youth services. And the other thing that's really upset me is about day centres for people with mental health issues and learning disabilities, because that's the stuff that's not very politically popular, but it's the stuff that absolutely looks after our communities and the most vulnerable members of our communities, which is so important. I haven't answered Gary's question. Gary knows that the ward councillors are absolutely passionate about supporting residents around Tideway. My ward colleague Eliza was at a meeting as I left this evening about the TRA issue and trying to support residents there. I mean, to be fair, the Tideway issue has been a good cross-party issue through the planning process, where we stood up, we all gave evidence. It got very technical about what way. I tell you, as a councillor, you learn more about things you never thought you'd need to know. So I know more about sewer sites and drive sites and receptor sites than I ever thought I'd know. So I think there has been some good work, but there is more to be done. And as always, the council can say no sometimes and get the lawyers threatening. Sadly, the council had an opportunity to do judicial review and missed the deadline by 1 day, so we did miss something there. But hopefully we can persuade the council to be tougher, and therefore Tideway might take the action more seriously than they have done so far.
Thank you, Amir. And Eleanor?
So to pick up that last issue about the super sewer, I think something that is really important is to invest in the environmental protection officers who can hold companies to account on terms of noise pollution, dust pollution. We have got the laws to do that. We don't have enough staff in the council to do it. They're really overstretched, and we need perhaps to threaten legal action, but also just to lay down the law. And where environmental protection officers have come out onto building sites that I've been aware of, they have been very good and very strong. So we need to work with that protection, but also to ask MPs to lobby. And another issue that affects people in Southwark is noise from aeroplanes, and that's something where we would like to see a commitment from our MPs about airport expansion, because we know how much noise affects people. In terms of securing funding for communities, I think it is a much larger issue as well. It's not just about the one-off funding that might be funded by developers through Section 106 or Cllr. It's not just about building a building, it's about those ongoing costs of running things, which everyone knows are difficult to secure. But if you have a more equal income, if everyone has enough money to be able to afford a ticket once in a while, then that can also contribute to the revenue. We need funding from the national level for communities, but we also need to be able to participate as citizens in supporting the community organisations that are important to us. In the Green Party, there's a very important principle of devolving decision making to the lowest meaningful level. So the question about community groups forming, it makes sense that people can form a group that makes sense for them in terms of geographical areas, local connections. But what I think is really important is that that should not be allowed then to set one area against another. And that's something that we've seen quite often in terms of transport planning, or lack of transport planning in the south of the borough, where one area is set against another. So, well, we'll close this road and the impact will be on another road. And so two neighbourhood areas that ought to be allies, that ought to be saying, look, we live 5 minutes walk away, let's work together, let's reduce traffic across the whole area. Instead, they're having pitched battles. So I think, yes, we need to work within devolved smaller groups, because that's how we get to know each other and to talk directly to each other. But we also need things like the Southwark Group of Tenants organisations that bring people together in larger decision-making and deliberating bodies.
Thank you, Eleanor. We're going to move on to the next pre-submitted question. So, if I could ask Natalie the question, please.
Thank you. My name is Natalie, and I'd like to ask a question. How and will the candidates commit to building a working, practical relationship with residents and community groups in the future for delivering housing, employment and skills, social care, etc., as opposed to just having talking shops or discussions? Are there any new ideas that you have to really engage those groups?
Thank you, Natalie. And Nude.
Thanks, Natalie. I mean, very much to the heart of kind of what I believe about genuinely engaging residents with decisions. And it seems to me the only way you can really do that is if you actually let go of decisions and of money. And that's something that is very tough for people in power to do, because once you've got power and you've fought really hard to get elected, to actually let go and let it go to communities is tough, but it leads to better decisions. Sometimes it leads to decisions taking longer, but actually, if you get to the right decision, in my view, it's much worth having that deliberation, and it gets people bought in along the way. I mean, in my experience, residents are really reasonable people. They will understand the challenges that the council has, and they will work with the council, but they want to be treated as equals. And often we have a sort of system, and I think it's nationally and locally, where people are seen as the kind of passive recipients, and you're lucky if you get your free swimmer gym, or you're lucky if you get this. And actually, well, in different communities, people have different needs. As I mentioned, the Lib Dems did introduce community councils when we ran the council. They devolved sort of budget making, but also things like planning decisions, and local planning applications were decided by those local councillors, and they were decided in those communities. I think it's a shame that Labour sort of merged the community council areas and made them much bigger. So actually, this community council area stretches from just the other side of Croy Street, where Southwark starts, down to sort of the Walworth Road, and the Aylesbury, and almost at Camberwell, and you're like, well, that's not a community, that's a huge area. So I think it's a shame that the areas got much bigger and that they lost some really important decision making. I would definitely want more of that, but I think none of it works unless you actually let go of the money. And you need to do that in a way that you're making sure decisions are representative, that you're reaching out to groups that don't normally engage, that you're not just doing it in traditional council meeting ways, you're actually using social media, you're using things like Facebook, which all my residents they're on their Facebook groups much more than anything else. So there are ways of doing it and being creative, but the fundamental point is you have to believe that individuals can make good decisions and that you don't know best, and I think politicians struggle with that sometimes.
Thank you, Anood. Peter?
Thank you very much indeed, Amir. I won't pretend it's not tough. I think it's a really tough question, because thinking about what you're talking about, I mean that was kind of the Lambeth Cooperative Council model, that all this power was going to be invested in communities. Well, what happened to that? I mean, the reality is some of this democracy is really expensive to do as well. And in terms of and you talking about reducing the number of community councils, that was partly, well, it was entirely as a response to having to make savings within the council. And I do get what you say about this area being too big. The berms in Rotherhithe area, it is too big, and I think we do have to revisit that. Planning did sit in community councils, it doesn't anymore. There was no budget sitting with community councils up until 2010. There is now. Every ward. No, there's not in that direct way. It's still a decision taken by a cabinet member. There is money actually sits in decisions taken by the community council now. So I think it's tough, Natalie, because. I think the question is, how do we really ensure that our engagement as a council is valuable engagement with the communities that we seek to represent? And it's conversations like this, I guess. It's how do we respond in an age of social media, as Anoop mentioned, to people's concerns, and I think there's something probably more we can do about that. In terms of home building, I mean, we're committed with Peckham Citizens to a community land trust in Peckham when that happens. I mean, that's a new thing for us, and I think that will be good news. And Eleanor mentioned community land trust, so that's something coming to Southwark soon. But I'm kind of open to ideas, but I think we also have to be aware of the models that have been tried and which have not worked, and also be mindful of the genuine budget constraints that sit over us at this time. But I'll go away and think about it. Actually, I've still got 6 months to think about how we can do things before our manifesto and you come to vote. So I think that's a good one to take away and mull over how we improve that engagement and local democracy even more.
Thank you, Peter. And Eleanor?
I go to a lot of meetings, and I'm sure you do too, if you're nodding. And sometimes tenants and residents organisations or community groups can be the most frustrating experience of your life. And sometimes they can be so amazing. I mean, the expertise, the warmth, the knowledge, the life experience that people bring is just fantastic. It's partly what I said before about finding the right size of a group, finding the size where everyone has a chance to speak and everyone has a chance to really contribute and do something. It's partly about new media, as Anoop said. It might be that people want to contribute through social media rather than going to a meeting, because sometimes meetings are the worst ways to get things done, and we need to be holding events at the times when people are about and are free and have a moment just to stop and think and get involved. So that might be about organising a community gardening session where people just walk by, see something's happening, and they can join in if they want, or they can just stop and chat for 5 minutes. It can be really off-putting to see a sign that says, meeting here, 7:30 till 9:30. 2 hours of what do I know, who's going to be there, what's going to happen, is it going to be really boring? Much more inviting to make sure that there's something happening on a Saturday morning when people are on their way to the shops, and they can just drop by, see who's there, start to get involved, find out what's happening. And I'm also thinking about Southwark cyclists, who have the most extraordinary people involved with them, including an emeritus professor of public health, who's out helping people change their tyres at a drop-in cycle repair, or counting cycles on the new cycle superhighway, Quiet Way, number 1. People are extraordinary, and we just have to find the right way to meet them and work with them.
Thank you, Eleanor. Do we have any supplementals? We'll go for Ian and then John.
Thank you very much. Ian Tucker from Coin Street Community Builders. I'd just like to start by saying a thank you to all of you for coming, because it is you bothering to come and meet with people in smaller and less obvious meetings that does allow people to form relationships out of which community really works. I suppose my question's going to be about, I get that you have to compete for the vote, and I guess a hustings is part of that process, but listening to you all, you know, I sort of feel there's so much that you share in your aspirations. Are there ways in which you could work together, speak with a unified voice to government, you know, which you've all said is not giving you tools which are needed in order to sort out whether it's housing. I mean, housing, should there be different social, you know, planning use classes for real, affordable, intermediate, that either was sort of looking to owner occupied, maybe a separate one for, you know, the bank box one. I just wondered whether there, or is it just dreaming?
Thank you, Ian. We'll take the other question and then we'll get the answers. John.
So politicians don't generally have a lot of trust from people, whether that be MPs or whether that be at a local level. I have had some concerns about some of the things that the news can say, in the sense that I appreciate, yes, there are things that could be thrown at the Labour Council over that, but at the end of the day, the Lib Dems, you know, when they were in coalition previously, some of the faults, so Larknor, for instance, the Ledbury was actually there when the Lib Dems were there, and Lend-Lease actually were brought in, you know, during that council. So my question is around basically accountability, and it's a little bit specific to sort of each of you in a way, but I mean, I'd like to ask Anood, you know, how can you recognise the fact that actually Lib Dems didn't necessarily perform perfectly back then, and what has actually been learned from that? To Peter, I would ask, you know, what do you feel actually is a big failing that's not been achieved over the last, you know, council term, and how would that be fixed? And then to Eleanor, I would ask about how effectively you would create a better sense of trust in the council and greater accountability, which obviously the other two can also answer on.
So we've got 3 questions there. And one from you. Does anyone else have another supplemental? This is the last question, so if you want to go. So, yes. And so, Alan, so we'll take all the questions and then go through them one by one.
It's really to support some of the questions that have just been asked. But it seems to me, as a fairly newcomer to the area and to local politics, that you all sound fairly frustrated with what's going on. You sound irritated by the situation. But to somebody who's you know, a consumer living my life here, things seem fairly dysfunctional. So, you know, we have an education system that appears to me to not to be fit for purpose. And we have mental health, and we see evidence of problems there on a daily basis. Some examples of very obvious neglect. We see public safety, which appears to be problematic too. We've heard about problems of infrastructure.
If you could turn into a question, please.
I'm going to. 10% of council homes that are not warm, dry or safe. Residents who appear to have a problem with the impact of change. And something that happened in 1980, 37 years ago, that's still being held responsible for the problems that we face today. So, who's not complacent here? And who is going to be strategic at some point, rather than telling us what we've already heard a million times? And who is going to be properly accountable for all of this? And who's going to be a bit more radical? There's enough questions, yeah? Who's going to be a bit more radical? And who's going to be different? Because if we just do the same again and again and again, we're going to get the same outcomes. And I've heard nothing today that reassures me that things are going to be less dysfunctional next year or 2 years, in 2 years' time than they are now.
Okay, so we've got a question from Ian, we've got 3 individual questions from John, and then if I can summarise, Alan, your question is basically, what's the strategy and can we not have excuses? Is that fair? Okay.
Okay, right. Peter.
Okay. Well, Ian, are there ways to work together? Yes, of course there are. And, you know, we have to recognise there are differences between us, and sometimes those differences are overemphasised, probably. You know, sometimes people say things which I can't think they genuinely believe. And that's unfortunate, but there we are. That's the system we're working in. But I think there are things that we can do, and I think we can speak with one voice on, I hope, the need for a new housing economy as a for instance. Alan, is it your question on the dysfunction? I mean, I don't think we should get too down on ourselves. I don't think the system is so dysfunctional. Otherwise, you know, there would be this terrible kind of dystopian visions we walk out of here this evening. It's not. Our schools, you know, if you want dysfunction, go back 20 years for our schools. You know, all of our schools are, you know, but one or two are good or outstanding now, with improving results for our kids. So I don't think we need to. The structure might be a bit weird, but actually the results we're getting are pretty good. I talked about 1980s just to explain, because I'm not sure everyone gets it, why we're where we're at with housing. But we have. We signed off in 2013 a 30-year housing plan for Southwark. That was strategic. Unfortunately, people like George Osborne then get in the way because they kick big holes in our budget because they insist on a 1% annual reduction in social rents. So we have tried to be strategic. We have tried to be long-term as an administration. You know, and you know, our commitment on council housing over 30 years, for instance. We've tried to do what you're asking us to do, but sometimes other forces come along and, as I say, try and, you know, knock it down. But I think you know, we're not in such a bad place at all. You know, commitments like the Old Kent Road that we've talked about, which is not about driving out businesses that are there, but about keeping them, but adding to them 10,000 new jobs, 20,000 new homes. That's pretty strategic. You know, these are pretty long-term goals that we're talking about. Our investment in new kitchens and bathrooms for all our council houses, that's pretty strategic. Our commitment to the London living wage, our ethical care charter, these are pretty strategic things which are improving people's lives and outcomes. John, what's been the failure in the last 4 years? The failure will be not delivering the number of council homes that I thought we'd be able to deliver by now, and I put my hands up. There was another failure which was broadband on the Rotherhithe Peninsula. I'm really hopeful we're going to have cracked that one by the time we get to next May, by not relying on Openreach, who are pretty hopeless, but by going elsewhere. And I'm hoping that at least 90% of the Rotherhithe Peninsula will have broadband speeds of up to 40 megs pretty soon. Fingers crossed for that. So, you know, I think there are good things that are going. And how can we improve trust and accountability? You know, I think it is about being honest. You know, Anud and I are old sparring partners on this, but I mean, she tweeted the other day, and I took exception to it. You know, Southwark Labour are systematically socially cleansing Southwark. I do not believe for a moment you can genuinely believe that. And if you do genuinely believe that, it's not the effect of our actions, because the effect of our actions is that, for instance, at the Haygate, 99% of people stayed within Southwark, 67% within SE17 and SE1. The same is true at the Aylesbury. For leaseholders, of course, who, as John pointed out, who was in power when all but 6 residents of the Haygate were decanted? It was your party. So, you know, before you chuck, I don't chuck that brick back very often, but I think it's quite a good one to chuck, because all but 6 residents of the Haygate estate were empty by your party, including when you were a councillor. So don't forget that. So I think a bit of trust is important, and you get trust by being honest. And I think a bit of honesty is, and I try and be honest about what I say and what we do. And the good news is, John, that local government and local politicians are trusted more than national politicians. Now, I know it's a pretty low benchmark these days, but that's still the reality. 60% of people still trust their local councils and councillors. So let's try and see what we can do together to get that up.
Thank you, Peter. Anud.
Thanks very much. Good set of questions, Tab. I mean, just very briefly on Ian's question, I think one of the real problems we have in this country is our voting system. I think we have a really frustrating first past the post system with sort of safe seats and where lots of people feel their vote doesn't matter. And actually, if you had a more proportional voting system, then actually your government, local and national, would reflect more people's voting preferences, but they'd actually feel much more engaged. And then I think also parties would naturally have to work together more now. You could argue whether coalition has been a good thing or not, but certainly I think parties having to compromise and debate stuff and govern together would make for better decisions. We do some cross-party stuff, Peter. And certainly actually I think the big thing that we do need to do more cross-party work on is the effects of Brexit on Southwark, because I think that's a massive thing where we absolutely agree. London generally voted Remain, and we need to find a way of really supporting our communities through what is going to be incredibly difficult times. So I think that's something we absolutely need to do cross-party stuff on. We've been to lobby government ministers together, particularly around funding, but also around there is cross-party agreement on the Bakerloo line, on the Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf Bridge, and we've worked together on those things. I also tend to think Peter's got pretty good intentions. I think most people who get involved in local politics are actually decent people who want to make the world better. But I fundamentally disagree about his policies on housing and regeneration, and I will say that, and I will say it because I think the effect of your policies are both unworkable and unjust, and I will continue to say that until I've changed them, because I think my job as leader of the opposition at Southwark Council is to challenge you, is to scrutinise what you're doing, and is to try and make the council do a better job. A really fair point about, we were running the council for 8 years, and we therefore must have done some things wrong, and certainly we lost our majority in 2010, and therefore clearly not everything went well. When I first came to Southwark, as I said earlier, and I was 9 years old and started living in Camberwell, Southwark Labour had run the council for 40 years with pretty much no opposition at all. Certainly, Peter just touched on how dire the education system was so bad that the national government had taken it away and privatised it to a stationery company. The streets were knee-deep in litter. Camberwell Green was filthy. And things like housing benefit claims were being processed so slowly that people were being evicted while they're doing that. And actually, what I think changed when the Lib Dems took control of the council was political competition. And that, to me, is so important. That competition makes everybody work harder. So I know that I work really hard as a local councillor because I'm up for election every 4 years. I think that Labour do a better job at the council because they know they've got an opposition who will give them a tough time, whether we like it or not. We are sparring partners, and Peter can't get away with anything without me tweeting at him. So, actually that's a good thing. Just to pick up a couple of the criticisms, the Lend-Lease, Elephant and Castle stuff. So the regeneration project at the Elephant started under the Liberal Democrats. We'd had some really successful regeneration at somewhere like Bermondsey Spa, where we got genuinely mixed communities, where we got health services, where we were able to knock down council blocks and replace them with a mix of social rents, shared ownership and private. And that really worked. People were starting to say regeneration is a good thing, and we were negotiating, and Lend-Lease was a preferred partner. The crash happened in 2009, where everything was sort of paused, and that made things very difficult to progress. And effectively, Lend-Lease were coming to the council and saying, look, we can't give you what you want on affordable housing. We can't give you a new leisure centre, a new shopping centre. This is what we've got. And we refused to sign the deal. And we got huge stick from Labour, who were the opposition at the time. Dither and delay, that was their constant criticism. Oh, you Lib Dems, you've had 8 years to sign this deal. Dither and delay, dither and delay. And Peter, when he took control and became leader of the council in 2010, was so desperate to use a slogan, which was, we did more in 8 weeks than you did in 8 years, that they rushed the deal in 8 weeks. They took control of the council and signed that deal in 8 weeks. Now, anybody who negotiates anything wouldn't rush a deal in 8 weeks. You wouldn't buy a house in 8 weeks, let alone sign a multi-million pound deal at the Elephant in 8 weeks. And that's why we didn't get the amount of affordable housing that was in the council's own planning policy. And you're right, Peter, the decamp process started under us, but we had not said that it was okay to lose 1,000 council flats and get 79 back. And we would never have signed that deal. And we didn't, and we refused to, despite criticism from you and your leaflets accusing us of dither and delay. So, yes, you're right, the process started, but it certainly was not a signed rush deal under us. Lacanau, you're right, the big fire in Camberwell happened under us, and I think we all learned some very serious lessons about fire safety. Generally, we've done stuff cross-party on fire safety because it's so serious. But I do think some of the concerns of the Ledbury residents were legitimate for us to raise, because otherwise there is a danger that the council becomes complacent, thinks it's doing everything, and it's Peter's job to say what a wonderful job they're doing. And actually, if they don't get criticism, then residents' voices can get very missed in the system. I suppose finally, the point about frustration and dysfunctionality. I mean, I'm a liberal, I'm an optimist by nature, and actually I think this is a wonderful borough to live in. I love it. I just want to make sure that my children and my children's children will also be able to live in it. I think we have great schools, actually. I think we're really lucky. We need more of them, we need more school places. My day job, I work for an education charity, and we particularly target schools in deprived communities, and I travel quite a lot across the country. Sorry, just the point I was going to make is education in London is massively ahead of some really tough deprived communities in the rest of the country, so I think we should absolutely celebrate our young people and what our teachers in our schools are doing. We can always do better. I can always be better as a local ward councillor, as the leader of the opposition, and hopefully after May, the leader of the council.
Thank you, Anu. Eleanor.
So we have this image of the sparring partners in the boxing ring, Labour, Lib Dems. I'm not really that interested in getting into the boxing ring. I think you might find me cleaning the windows of the gym or outside it planting some plants, doing something that's not about the tired old debate. I hope you feel from what I've said today that I'm not complacent. I am really impatient for change, though. We will work, of course, where we've got areas that are in common. And, it's a bit of a joke, but it's a nice thing as well, that a lot of the Labour Party manifesto promises this time round were borrowed from the Green Party's manifestos of previous years. We're all in favour of recycling, and we're very proud that we had some ideas at the time that people laughed at, that sounded very far-fetched, and that are now coming back into the mainstream. So there's that. But I am impatient, and I do see the Green Party's role as in putting pressure on areas where the current administration and the current opposition just are not doing enough. And one of my biggest concerns is around public health and air pollution. The Green Party triggered the first full council debate on air pollution in 2011. It was the first time it had been talked about in Southwark Council. And we're still talking about it. And the last air quality action plan produced by Southwark Council was even worse. The 2016 one was worse than the 2012 one. It had fewer targets, fewer outcomes, fewer means for getting to those results. It was shocking. We made a response, and it was taken in and debated. We want to have the chance to be at the table and to actually be feeding into that discussion in a really constructive way. The question about a better sense of accountability, I think we might look to Lambeth, to the People's Audit there, where they've been uncovering the accounts. They've been looking and showing people where the money's spent. And I think there's no problem with showing where public money is spent, but perhaps some things have to be redacted, like the viability assessments produced by developers, which are produced with, no, not anymore, but that's what we've had over the last few years, a culture of secrecy, where the facts that decisions are made on are kept secret from the people who live in the borough. So I'm not complacent, but I'm not a councillor. I'm hungry to have the chance to make the radical changes that you're asking for.
Thank you, Eleanor. What we're going to do now is allow the leaders of the local parties just to make some closing remarks, and then we'll close the hustings to an end. So we'll start with Peter, please.
Okay, thanks, Amir. Well, it's been a good debate. We've covered lots of ground. I think democracy is really, really important locally, and I think to this extent, Anuda's absolutely right. It's unless you've been in opposition, you don't appreciate the difference that being in power can bring. And I think it's really important that any administration, whoever is in administration, remembers that it is the will of the people ultimately that determines who is running our borough. Nothing can be taken for granted, and the worst thing you can do is be complacent or become like part of the management structure of the council. You have to be remind yourself you're coming from the outside, and you should be kicking things as you go in to try and see what you can improve and what you can do. So I'm pleased that democracy is alive and well in Southwark, and long may it continue. Obviously, I want all 63 seats for Labour, just as Anubis Sage and Eleanor probably be much more reasonable to say, well, she'll just do the majority. But we're there to win majorities. I think you have seen some problems in councils which have almost become one-party states, and I think that's the challenge for us, and I think that's why this kind of debate, Amir, is really, really important going through to next May, so that we can be properly challenged both on our records and our visions for the future. So thank you for organising today. Obviously, I would commend Southwark Labour to you as the party which I hope has earned your trust and confidence over the last 7.5 years, and we will work incredibly hard to win your trust and confidence going forward into next May.
Thank you, Peter. And Anud?
Thanks very much, Amir, for chairing it, and for everybody for such a sort of variety of tough questions. It's always good to take part in, and thank you very much to colleagues on the panel as well. I suppose I just want to kind of repeat what I said at the beginning, which is I think that the most effective council we could have is one that actually engages residents and works with them, rather than kind of makes remote decisions in a town hall. I feel really strongly like your first vote is for your ward councillors, and Liberal Democrats have an excellent reputation as very strong ward councillors, and certainly I'm very proud of the record of all my council group in representing their communities. The more of those good ward councillors you have that make up the majority in the council means that actually you've got people who are very rooted in their communities coming to the town hall and making decisions together. Actually, I would much rather we had a committee system at the council where we did have involvement from other cross-party. We had a kind of strong leader cabinet model, which was introduced by the new Labour government as a kind of model of local government. And actually, I think it makes people feel very disempowered, including backbench councillors, actually, who often feel like they're not influencing things as much. So I would really like us to come out of May 2018's elections with incredibly strong local representatives, because I think that's hugely important. And obviously I would like, as a majority of them, to be Liberal Democrat councillors, but so that we can then give away some of that power, because actually our communities know best about the decisions that affect them the most. I touched on the sort of 3 key areas I thought were really important. We've talked a lot around housing, which obviously I feel very strongly about, but I do think some of the other challenges our communities are facing are different in different parts of the borough, and we need radical solutions, but solutions that come from the community and are tailored to those neighbourhoods.
Thank you, Anud. And Eleanor?
I'd also like to thank Bankside Residents Forum and Amir for chairing, and for the questions from the audience. It's been really good to have a chance to air different policy ideas. I am a bit shocked by the idea of a one-party state in Southwark, and it seems a bit ironic when we've been talking all evening about diversity of voices within the communities. Wouldn't we want to have diversity of views within the council? Wouldn't we want to have a chance to hammer out the best solution in discussion? And I would support Anud's suggestion about a committee system offering more of a chance of that than the existing cabinet system, where decisions are often made by one councillor. I think the first step, we should see this as the first step to further conversation, and that it's very difficult within a meeting like this to cover all policy areas, to talk in detail about practical solutions. So I've talked a bit about air pollution, and I have a lot of practical, as we said at the beginning, talking about vision and practicality, I have a lot of practical ideas about the ways that we can transform the borough. And I would really like this to be the first step in an ongoing conversation where we can talk in more detail about what we could do within Southwark with a green voice.
Thank you very much. I'd like to first thank everyone that's come tonight and taken part in this. I'd like to thank Coin Street, obviously, for giving us the venue, and thank all the candidates and
these are the local parties that are here to have their say. This is the first of a series of hustings which we're going to be doing all across Southwark with other organisations. We will also be doing a mass consultation across the borough to try and get people's views, which we will then put forward to the local parties, and hopefully they can then take up some of the ideas and put them in their manifesto. So thank you very much.